Hey everyone, it's Dr. Ramani talking our White Lotus. I didn't love this week's episode. I'm going to be honest with you. So I had to sleep on it and then kind of find the threads that meant something to me from a narcissism perspective. A little bit too much debauchery. I'm a bit of a, I don't know. I'm a bit of a bore, so it's all a bit too much. So it took me a minute to kind of dig through the narcissism, and it was very, very much there, but it was interesting. It was interestingly hidden in interesting places. And this is definitely the episode of where the narcissistic people all find God and Buddhism, which I found fascinating. We'll say something about that towards the end of this video. So, there's always these little bits and pieces that are always worth mentioning. I think the one that really struck me, and probably the first part of it that in this earlier in the episode, was Belinda, the woman who worked in the spa, who now is getting very anxious that Greg slash Gary knows who she is and kind of making inquiries about her. The experience she has with the hotel manager. The hotel manager definitely, I can't quite get my head. He's sniveling and insipid. I do not like him, but I don't think he's narcissistic. It's an interesting kind of how I relate to that character of the hotel manager guy who's always like sort of he's saying all the things in tie and wearing all the tie outfits and all that, but like there's something about him that's unsettling. I don't know that I'd say it's narcissistic. Again, it's insipid. So it's like some people can get under our skin. Doesn't mean they're narcissistic. But he does gaslight Belinda, right? About she's come to him from a place of fear. But this guy lives in a place of fear, this hotel manager, and he doesn't want to do anything to throw off this job. This job is clearly his life. And so he's willing to allow someone who actually is working there on a temporary basis live in this sense of fear around a very, very obviously valid complaint she's brought up, and he doesn't care. A little bit more gaslighting happens when the hapless security guard sees that the gun has been taken, and then he has this good sense to look at the security video. He recognizes Tim, the finance guy, the father in that family, is the one who took it. And when he approaches him, Tim, the finance guy, is willing to gaslight everyone about everything, right? He doesn't quite gaslight the guard. He actually lies to him and says, I don't have the gun. In other episodes, Tim, for example, would gaslight his wife about the anti-anxiety pills, right? It is interesting because I do believe that not only is the mom in that family a narcissistic and is narcissistic, but she's also a drug addict or an alcoholic or some combination of the both. So, it's interesting because anti-anxiety meds work a lot like alcohol. So it's sort of in that whole spectrum. So she's just needing to constantly numb herself to stay in this sort of false situation that she's in. And it's really interesting how she shows up for her daughter, right? It's very classical narcissistic mother. Everything's about me. How could you do this to me? The daughter, on whatever kind of spiritual meditation quest she is to find herself, but it still is her daughter. And the mom, it's literally made her daughter's inquiry about her. And we know this in clear narcissism family 101 stuff, only cares about what is this going to look like? Oh my gosh, what is this going to look like to other people? That in general tends to be all a narcissistic parent cares about. That poor gal is going through that. And there's actually an interesting scene where the gal is just sort of sitting and introspecting. And I was wondering if she's wondering, gosh, both my parents are really narcissistic. Now, the scene, just this entire episode came down to one scene for me that I watched twice because I'm like, what is this? When my favorite vulnerable narcissist at this point, this guy may be my favorite character in this whole damn show. It is now in Bangkok, right? The one we think is out there to kill the person who wronged his father, the one with the very young girlfriend. Well, he goes there to meet his contact, and they meet in the lobby of the hotel, and then they have their drink together. And the friend is making all of these kinds of revelations about his life, which honestly, there's nothing in my life more entertaining than watching vulnerable narcissistic man's face. Because I have to say, I think I might have had the same face too. As I was watching the show. But what was fascinating was literally that man talking about his sexual misadventures throughout the city of Bangkok was kind of like a bonus narcissist in the show because he's not really central to the people staying at the hotel part of it. But basically his fantasy was he wanted to be him with him having sex with him. I was like, okay, you win for most narcissistic sexual fantasy. He literally was fantasizing. I want to be the person I'm having sex with, but I want someone who looks like me and is like me to have sex with me. He wants to have sex with himself. I was like, okay, I fold. Like, this is narcissism at such a high level. So there was that whole thing, and the whole thing was just so strange. We didn't know enough about the guy, the chamomile tea drinking friend of the vulnerable narcissist in Bangkok, but all I could say is like, there's something going on here. Because like, okay, great. So he gives Rick a gun. So, obviously they're trying to create that all eerie storyline of who's going to kill who. I'm actually more interested in all the narcissism in the show. Um, and the show is getting so twisted that this guy, Rick, the vulnerable narcissist who's gone to Bangkok, who let out all the snakes, and his girlfriend, Chelsea, I'm finally learning everyone's name, the very young woman, they're starting to feel like a love story at this point. That is how messed up the people on this show are. Because she says all the things that people in a narcissistic relationship would say, like, everything's about him, my needs don't matter, but she's still very trauma bonded to him. Bless her heart. Okay. So there's also a lot of using Buddhism in this episode for what it's not designed for, which is, I think they're using Buddhism as escape and absolution and like a place for their messes to be fixed. I don't think that's what any religion was designed for. I don't think that's what you're supposed to be doing, but narcissistic people often find God when it's very convenient for them. And what's also interesting is at one point that now the Tim, the finance father, has the gun and is going to harm himself with it and end his life. And he writes the note and he does the whole thing. And then his wife walks in. And I think also it didn't work. The gun wasn't working properly. And so he lives. And what was interesting was his wife. So this is I mean, you can think that could there ever be a more existentially big moment in somebody's life, right? Wife comes in asking, you don't seem like yourself. And now the finance dad, Tim, is blaming everything that's going wrong on all the expectations people have of him. So many expectations on me, a lot of that blame shifting. So finance dad, Tim, pretty clearly narcissistic. Mom, whose name I don't remember, narcissistic. Um, Vulnerable narcissistic Bangkok Rick, trying to get my head around him because there's something happening there that is very intriguing. Again, he may be my favorite character. Now, we don't see Greg in this episode, but his presence is very much felt. Now, regarding the storyline with the three women, it's by far my least favorite storyline. I don't like any of the characters. They're terrible. They're ridiculous. I think it's more of that mild, sort of emotionally stunted. I mean, they're on vacation. They want to have a good time, so I don't want to judge, but it still feels very emotionally stunted. And then, of course, you have the whole issue of them taking, I guess, ecstasy at the full moon festival. This is the young girlfriend of the vulnerable narcissist, the young girlfriend of Greg, who does think he could kill her because he could, and then the Saxon, the sort of sex addicted son of the rich family, and then the other son whose name I can't remember, who is kind of like trying to win over his brother. And so a lot of sort of sexually porous boundaries in that scene. And again, it really got at sort of that sense of these really twisted boundaries that even a narcissistic sibling could have with another sibling. So then there's all of that, right? So whenever I see a boat now in White Lotus, I'm like, someone's going to die. So I now have a new hypothesis on what's going to happen. This is my new hypothesis on how this is going to go down at the end. I don't think that they're going to keep Greg and Gary going. The storyline doesn't make sense because he is a he's a fugitive. Multiple police are looking for him. Maybe he can't be extradited from Thailand. I think they need to be done with him. So I actually think Greg, the husband of Tanya, is going to be the one who gets killed. But I have a strange hypothesis. We'll see if they'll give us this sort of part of the story that I actually think that something's going to happen to Greg on the boat, sort of like a poetic justice kind of thing, that he dies in a boat way, the way Tanya did. And maybe the boat is close to shore. That's why we hear the bang, bang, bang. But I do think that he tries to kill either the girlfriend or Saxon or even this younger son because he suspects that they were having sex with his girlfriend, but then he ends up getting killed. Like he falls off the boat and hits his head, just like Tanya did. That's my new hypothesis. That's why we hear gunshots. And I don't think they'll kill more than one person. White Lotus is too much attention to detail. So I don't think they'll kill more than one person, but that's what I think is going to happen. That's my hypothesis. I'm sticking to it for now until next week, which of course I'm going to change it again. But now I got Greg being killed and that because he tries to kill them. His guns, he has everything else he needs. But that's my guess. So, and I do think that finance dad Tim is going to try to stay in Thailand with his daughter because A, it might protect him, and B, then he was trying to find God after that whole event. So again, we'll see. I'm hoping next week is a little bit less of these kinds of this sort of debauchery, but I think on this journey we had to get that scene out so we can bring this slowly to its ending. But that's it. That what the narcissism we did see came out in lots of different ways. We also saw that whole turning to religion, God, and faith as sort of a fix-it because narcissistic people feel entitled to that. But that's my guess. I hope you enjoyed the episode. I'll see you next week.